Alrighty, so today we're going to talk about the book that we read over the past 2.5 weeks called Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. It is written by Daniel L. Everett, and on the cover here it says Life and Language in the Amazonian Jungle. I'm Ben.
I'm Carsyn.
Yuefeng. Cigdem.
And yeah, let's get started. So, first to give you all some background, let's address the questions where, who, and when as good ways to just kind of get some context for what we're going to be talking about. So, where does this book take place? It takes place in the Amazonian jungle. This is the Amazon River and all of its tributaries. So, the closest large city to the area in which we're talking about is a place called Porto Velho. And here's Porto Velho in a blown up map. And if you follow the Madeira River further north, eventually you will reach Auxiliadora. And there is another tributary of the Madeira called the Masai River. I'm not great on the name and pronunciation of this river, but this is the area in which we're talking about. And so currently this is Paraha Reservation. So we'll get into explaining who the Paraha are and why Daniel Everett is involved with them. But so who? Daniel Everett, a Christian missionary as well as a linguist. His family, whom he brought with to the Amazonian jungle. And the Pirahas, who I mentioned before, they call themselves Hiatashi, and in their Piraha language. And yeah, they're an indigenous group to the Amazon jungle. So when Dan arrived in the Amazon in the late 1970s, and he would go on to spend the majority of the next 30 years there. So this is not like a brief ethnographical snapshot. This is a long study that he conducted there. So.
I will just read. Autobiography. Everett Daniel was very young when he was sent by one religious group to Brazil as missionary after getting strict theology training. His task was to learn the Piraha language and translate the Bible into the local language. Then he should persuade the local people to believe in Jesus. He followed the principle of the classical linguistic tradition to do field research, lived with Pirahas to learn the language and culture. For more than 30 years, he traveled back and forth between Western culture and the Amazon. Daniel got subsidized by religious groups and linguistic institutions, did many research work about the Piraha people and the language, made analysis about their Piraha languages, phonetics, morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. By 1995, he published many articles on Piraha phonology, got attention from many linguists. Daniel read many of the linguistic books cover to cover. He has taught graduate courses on most of them in many universities. Sometimes he worked as visiting scholar in MIT or University of Chicago. He became a scholar after scientific training for many years, but in the process of dealing with Piraha people, his faith and belief got changed by the happy, sinless, and satisfied Piraha people who are not lost and do not need God and salvation. So he became an atheist. The price was high. He lost his family. His family got broke up. This process was accompanied with lots of pain too.
So, in our presentation, we have lots of different images. So yeah, these are the Piraha people.
This slide might be a little redundant, so I'll just go through it very quickly. But yeah, so the majority of the book is focused on Dan's experience trying to learn this language, and they don't have a common language between each other. So the Piraha people speak a little bit of Portuguese, I believe, but they don't speak it very often. So it was kind of like a trial and error process where he would pick things up and like try to be like, what's the name for this? And then slowly start to piece together the language. And I feel like another notable thing is that, which Yuefeng started to talk about, but his religious journey shifts over time. So he starts off very religious and wants to save the people. The whole mission is to try to translate the Bible to their language so they can learn Christianity, and then he quickly realizes like they don't care, and then he realizes they're better off without it too, and then he starts to question his own beliefs.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, him interviewing people.
So we noticed a shift. The first half of the book was really heavy on the details of the language and how he was trying to learn it. It was very interesting to read because there were a lot of like small miscommunications that were sometimes really funny and then sometimes very dangerous. But yeah, so he would basically have to like reassess his knowledge throughout the time because he would think he understood the meaning of one word and then he would realize later they would use it in a completely different context. One example was like the word for in conjunction with or like in partner with, where at first he arrived to the village with someone, they used it, so he's like, they're talking about me and this other person with me, but then later on they used it again when he was eating a meal with vegetables and meat, and then he was like, wait, it's like not the same thing. So he would always have to kind of reevaluate and he would kind of analyze the different concepts, which was kind of hard because he doesn't think the same way as them at first. But yeah, the second half I feel like kind of shifted into less of a like urgent purpose to learn the language and more just bonding with the people and kind of getting to know the culture. So yeah, so he was more of a language user rather than learner or analyst in the second half. And then he also would advocate for them by trying to get them a clear reservation where no one else could really infiltrate, because there's like weird power dynamics between the government and then the indigenous groups, and they don't want outside influence. So he was able to kind of get them their protected reservation.
Mm-hmm. Had children. So, it's me or?
Phonetics.
No, I think this one is actually me. So phonetics, yeah, as we mentioned, like the language that Daniel learned is the Piraha language, is only known by 3 like outsider, basically people. One was a former missionary, one was another Brazilian linguist, and then was him. So it's like there's only 100 so real Piraha speakers in the world, like indigenous people who speak this language. And as far as outside foreigners who know it, is very, very few. So it is like definitely an endangered language. But so in connection to the phonetic linguistic features, it's a very interesting language phonetically because of the small amount of phonemes that are in the language. So Piraha men have 3 vowels and 8 consonants, and women have 7 consonants and 3 vowels. So if you think about the number of phonemes or sounds we have in English, it's something around like 48 in the 40s. And so if you think about a language with only 11 different possible sounds, you have to create very long words to essentially distinguish between words, because if there's so few sounds, then so many words sound similar to each other. The words have to be really long to make any distinguishing. So it is also a tonal language, like Chinese or Vietnamese, Mandarin or Vietnamese, and it also uses pitch widely. So English uses pitch to distinguishing meanings of only a few pairs of words, such as permit or permit, like to distinguish between a verb and a noun, but that's a very rare occasion. So we do not say English is tonal. But in this language, every syllable or vowel or word bears a distinctive pitch, also known as a tone. So one also interesting thing he noticed was, even though there are so few consonants in the language, the Piraha people sometimes swap consonants. So instead of starting a word with an H or a K, they would start it with an S, and the meaning is still communicated. So despite the few amount of consonants and vowels in the language, they still leave some room to exchange and kind of just put together words differently. So here is an example of the 4 different tones. I've done this exercise in Mandarin, like I don't know if y'all have, but like with ma, and like how certain words rise and fall and stuff like that. This is a very difficult language to pronounce. Hopefully at some time we can show a video, but yeah.
We don't have.
Yeah, I don't know if any of y'all want to give that a shot. It's tough. But yeah.
Yeah, so this is their house, actually.
They don't have walls in their houses either.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, morphology.
I think this is my slide. So Ben kind of already talked about how the words get really long because there aren't as many different sounds to distinguish what the words mean. And so the nouns don't really have irregular endings or anything, but the verbs do. So there could be 65,000 possible different verb endings. But yeah, for nouns, there's just one form of the noun and there's no prefix or suffix to refer to them. They don't have words for colors or numbers, but they have like conceptual words for it. So words like, they could distinguish like this pile's bigger than this pile and articulate that, but they wouldn't say there's 8 crayons and 2 crayons. And for numbers, they could say like this is blood, but they wouldn't say like it's red.
For colors.
For colors. Oh yeah, sorry, for colors. And then when they use pronouns, they use we pronouns instead of singular or like first person pronouns. But yeah, they prefer to speak in the present tense because they speak about their direct experience, so they don't like to speak of things that they didn't experience in the past tense that maybe like a long ago family member did. And they don't speak in the future tense very often because they don't like to prepare for the future, they just kind of take it as it comes, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's a very unique language in the sense of not really sure many other languages in the world share no color, no numbers, and heavy reliance on present tense.
Yeah.
It's very unique. Another image of a Paraha house.
About syntax. So Pitaha language has the SOV structure. That means subject, object, and verb. Not like English. English has strict order like subject, verb, and object. That's Pitaha's characteristics. Second is the grammar is a result of their culture. Because they live in present time. Everything is here and now. This phenomenon has relation with their culture. That's all. Third, the sentences in Pitaha language is very short. There is no recursion, no complex structure, no embedded sentences like relation clause. There are no clauses within clauses. And the first point is Pitaha language doesn't have reported speech. They prefer to speak from personal experience. They only believe what they see or believe somebody who live with them, whom they trust, tell them something. The fifth point is stylistic choice to repeat similar sentences when telling a story. For example, when they tell a story about a pregnant woman, how she died after struggling a lot on a beach to try to give birth to a child, but eventually she failed. They repeated a lot that she died. The child is too big. Nobody can help. Husband was not around. She has no mommy, no sister to help, and only doctor-like role. That person at that moment was not available. Is not in the village. So this lady died. In this process of telling a story, they use lots of repetitions, same as the story as about killing a jaguar. They repeat it a lot. The sentences are very small, very short, without any clauses. The sixth point is culture seems to play a role in the grammar in the Pitaha language. It's just some linguistic theory. We'll not talk about too much.
Yeah.
Come
You would talk. Gotcha.
Okay.
If there's any big fans of Noam Chomsky in here, I'm sorry. But
Yeah.
it's good.
Pitaha child.
With the cat.
Yeah, they don't really wear clothes. Most of the children are like between, infant age and then 12, I guess. They don't prefer wearing clothes. They just run around naked. So this was the only picture we found here. Yeah. So we will talk about the connections about semantics and pragmatics. So as you may guess, this tribe is very pragmatic. So they just keep what they need and they don't use what they doesn't benefit them at all. So this is the same thing for the language. They just use really simple and like right on the spot words or like definitions for their ideas. So he talks about they have like 5 types of language. So like they speak during the day, you know, like converse with their loved ones and relatives and everyone, and then they whistle during their hunting. Like they just use whistles when they're hunting. It's a real language. They speak it, but they just use the whistle sounds. And the intimate language is humming. So like loved ones or a mother and child, they just communicate with humming. And then yelling speech is if there is a tribe or someone on the other side of the river, they just yell something. So like they don't use any other language. And then musical speech is like they don't have actually rituals or anything, but they tell their stories in a musical way. That's why they use a lot of repetition to make it more, you know, effective, maybe impressive, or like to make them, to give the feeling actually. And then so like as I told you before, like every speech is used for unique purpose. And then we talked about they don't have numbers, but they have words like few, many, or a bulk, meanings like that. And they have actually like kind of, you know, mathematical knowledge according to their needs. For example, if they trade, they go for the bigger pile. Okay, I'll give you this kind of forest jungle product in return to this bigger bulk of nuts, for example. And then colors, they see colors, they know the distinction between them because they know every leaf in the jungle and they name them too. But they don't need to say any other word. They say like leaf, they say like a light or dark, or like blood, like fire. So they use these words instead of colors. And then they don't say sorry or thank you because there's no regret or anticipation or guilt in this tribe. They just act, they just show how they feel and how they think. And then, you know, if they, you know, they want to say thank you, they bring you nuts or they do something instead to show their gratitude. And they don't have cardinal directions. Their world is jungle, so it's upriver, downriver, to the jungle, to the forest. And then they don't have, you know, older kinship words because they don't live long, they don't talk about the past, so they don't have these words to, you know, name grandma, great-great-parents, or like distant cousins because they don't know them and they don't have them. And then, yeah, there's a little, yeah, so, in short, that's it. They just love being present right and now, like here and now. Can we?
Yeah, of course.
And we have, yeah, this picture. So that's funny. For example, in their culture, they use canoes a lot because they fish a lot, and they fish by their long spears. No, arrows. Yeah, and then. But they don't make them. They prefer getting them from somewhere else because in their culture, you don't need to make a canoe because you can get it from somewhere else. They don't
import foreign knowledge or
nothing. They all their belongings are disposable. All their houses are like for short term. They just, you know, just a little shade, that's all.
Right. There's that example, like Dan asked if they wanted like cloth bags to use over and over, but instead they would prefer to make a small bag out of palm leaves, and then he would realize after 1 or 2 uses that it would be destroyed. But they had no desire to make a more durable bag, or Dan once had a canoe maker come to their area and teach all the Piraha how to make canoes because he knew that they used canoes and that it was valuable to them. And so they watched the canoe maker, they made 1 or 2 canoes with him, and after he left, they just stopped making canoes and didn't show any sign to that they retained any of like the information of how to make the canoe, or that they even wanted to.
And they threw the tools into the river.
They threw,
don't
yeah, like threw tools
care
into a
about it.
river. It's when we talk about, you know, not using a future tense or a past tense, like these are people who are very anchored in the present, and they address their present needs, and you know, they're not thinking into the future. But that doesn't mean they're not happy people. Actually, it's quite the contrary.
Yeah.
We've seen that they are actually quite happy people.
Yeah. We'll talk about more about the culture, because the culture really absorbs you. Like, you want to know and learn more about them, because it's really different than what we are used to. Like, actually, it pushes your limits of, you know, understanding sometimes. So the name of the book, Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, is their term for good night. So Pirahans don't sleep like long hours in a row, and they don't sleep altogether. So somebody has to stay awake, because there are dangers, jaguars, crocodiles, like all types of tarantulas, snakes. So this is their term for good night before, you know, going to their chambers without walls. So, and they have beliefs about universe, that it's layered. So it's like upper biggie, the sky, lower biggie, the ground, and then subterranean world. I think I would pronounce it as Oi.
Oi.
Yeah. So, and there's a lack of creation myths, because they don't talk about the past. They don't care about the past, so they don't have stories for creation or stories for past events. And this actually forms their language. And then they don't have, I think, religion. They just believe in spirits, which are like, for example, trees have spirits. Trees are spirits, or like the river is a spirit, or any animal has a spirit. So they respect it, and they believe they speak to them. They believe they see those spirits everywhere. And yeah, so since they don't have the past, again, I will talk about the Bible or any other religion. Since they don't know Jesus, they don't see him, they don't talk to him, they don't believe in him. So that's the pragmatic side of them, again. And then they believe in toughness, so it's your responsibility. They don't eat much, they have to take care of themselves, and you know, to show how tough they are. That's why, for example, when a woman is giving birth, nobody helps her, because it's her responsibility, or like one very close loved one. Or if somebody is sick, they don't care, because they have to get through that by themselves. So they don't even feel sad about it, I guess. That's very interesting. And they don't have structures, we said. And the most interesting thing, one of the most interesting things, is just they treat children like adults. They give them knives, they let them go into the jungle, they don't talk to them like babies. They are individuals right from the birth, and they have to, you know, survive in this dangerous environment. And that's why they let them smoke and drink and do whatever they want, I guess. Yeah. More of that. We talked about their idea about future, so they don't preserve food, they just live daily. They go hunt, they go gather, and they have no art, only disposable thing, and they just like clap. They don't have musical instruments. They just like kind of sing musical stories and then dance. And they have gender roles, but it's not like, you know, rough. It's just like women go gather something and men hunt and fish. And they're collective. They feel like they're a big family. They protect each other. They, you know, love each other, but
it's contradictory.
Yeah.
Because in a society that values individual toughness so much, that
yeah,
we were kind of
the
having
examples of their daily life made us think like, how can they be collective and just leave someone suffer, you know, and die there? It's really interesting. And they have no leaders. They are very egalitarian. And yeah, they don't have funeral or weddings. they don't believe in those things either, and they're free with their relationships. And another thing, yeah, they're not violent. That's very interesting. They don't like to fight, or they don't solve their problems with violence. They don't even punish if someone kills someone, you know, like the only thing is just like
Ostracization.
Yeah, sending them to the forest, and that's all. That's really interesting. And yeah, learning.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just go through this very quick. Daniel's language learning method was interesting because he came into the Paraha region without any shared language. So, like Carsyn explained earlier, it was kind of a trial or error method where he would be like, "What is this? Phone." He dropped the phone. What happened? Like, the phone fell, and you know he was taking notes all this time. And after years and years and years of doing this, he really developed some skills in the language and became quite fluent. But you know, he had a whole method, including learning a certain amount of words every day. But we're gonna have to go a little bit quicker. So yeah, that's his language learning method. He was a missionary, but he was also a linguist. So that is important to note.
Yeah, and became Chomsky's greatest enemy.
Yes.
By the way.
Yes.
Because of the universal grammar.
Yes, universal grammar. Yeah, one of the rules of universal grammar is that all languages have recursion, meaning you can. Carsyn told me that Cigdem told me that Yuefeng told her that that the book fell after her cousin. Like, we can create a sentence that goes infinitely in English, but non-recursive languages are languages that don't operate under that rule. So Piraha language is one of those languages, and the sentences cannot go infinitely long, and this violates Noam Chomsky's rule of universal grammar. And so this work and this book in Daniel's time was very controversial in the high academic, linguistic, MIT kind of stuff, and we didn't know that, but but yeah, here's some important discussion questions to consider. Where do you stand on humanitarianism? Do you believe that those poorer than you, those with lower life expectancies, and those with higher child mortality rates should be helped by the more privileged? What are positives and risks associated with humanitarian action, and where do you draw the line? This is the question that we were holding with us while we were reading this book, because the Pirahas do have a lower life expectancy and higher child mortality rates. Most Pirahas die by the time they're 40, whereas Americans 70, 80. And then the second question is, does language influence and create culture, or does culture influence and create language? This is this whole Noam Chomsky, Daniel Everett debate. Everett believes that culture influences and creates language, whereas Noam Chomsky would argue that language influences and creates culture, that in our genetics there's grammar rules written in our genetics, and that understanding grammar and language is something innate to us as humans.
This is a village. Yeah, sure.
Final thought. Let's imagine the two absolutely different worlds. Skyscrapers, noisy cars, surging crowd, debauchery constitute a sharp contrast to the Amazon jungle with endless greens and wild animals. But these two environments became Everett Daniel's life reality for many years. In the process of learning language, he found that Piraha people are conservative and not sensitive to any foreign things. They refuse to learn anything new if they do not have a chance to experience it by themselves. He wrote, "Their isolation is due to their very strong sense of superiority to and disdain for other cultures. Far from thinking of themselves as inferior because they lack anything found in other languages and cultures, they consider that their way of life the best possible way of life. They are not interested in assimilating other values. So we see little seepage from other cultures or languages into Piraha. When I read this, I feel painful because they have the same characteristics as 100 years ago, or 300 years ago, 18th, 19th century China. They are similar in many ways. They have the same society mentality. They would not learn anything from other people, just think themselves are the best. Do not need to learn anything new. In this case, a people or nation will not march forward at all in a long river of time. Thus, they might be kicked out of game one day. I do not know exactly whether Piraha still exists today, because there is such kind of conception like the last Piraha. I know that United Nations has launched some programs to protect that the endangered tribes and language in order to keep human beings' diversity. I hope that the Piraha people and language could benefit from these programs. I would like to recommend this book for our classmates because you can find an interesting, attractive story, and at the same time, you can discover the concrete linguistic world. There's lots of big scholars like Chomsky and others, I cannot even remember their names. If you would like to read some important papers about linguistics, I think you pretty much can find their names here in this book. So let's open the book and start a journey to the Amazon jungle and get a rest of the modern world, which makes people exhausted sometimes. Thank you for attention.
My main takeaway was I kind of agree with Dan, and I think that the culture informs language more than language informs culture, especially in this case, because their vocab's different than vocab we have because they live in a completely different place than us, so they have different words and concepts that we don't have because we don't live in the same space. And yeah, like their whistle tones when they go and hunt is like different than what, that's like a cultural thing that I think is influencing their language. And then I just really, I don't know, like I had a lot of respect for the ethnography that was taking place because Dan kind of went into every single aspect of their lives to learn more because he realized staying on the home base with them, that's like where they relax, so they speak differently than if he goes into the jungle and hunts with them or when he goes onto the river with them. So it was cool, and he stayed there for 30 years, so I feel like, yeah, he started to kind of like not become one of them because he's like not gonna be one of them, but he really like learned how their culture works, which was really cool.
Yeah, made me reflect on what other ways of living might be like. I definitely have respect for these people. They're very proud people, and they have very unique culture. And while I agree with Carsyn and the author, culture influences language, and they have a very unique culture, so in turn they have a very unique language. Though the Piraha way of life is beautiful and unique, there arises some very serious problems when you don't have ready access to medicine and other essentials, which we use as Americans to maintain our long lifespan. I believe other cultures, unlike our own, should be respected and left alone if they desire, but I do think it is unjust to not introduce, at minimum, maybe the concept of some modern medicines to them. Dan, the author, his wife and one of his children almost died after a month or two of being there because they caught malaria. And the Piraha people didn't really react at all when that happened, and later on he found out it's because they were so used to their own people dying so often from malaria that they just thought that death is part of life, and there's nothing you really can do but accept it. And so I don't know, it's this whole humanitarian debate, but maybe modern medicine, I know it would make their lives longer. This book made me reflect on humanitarian action as a whole. I think Daniel did a good job of avoiding the white savior trope, as his relationship with the Piraha was a mutual exchange. Daniel gathered important linguistic information from a linguistically unique group of people over the course of 30 years and lived on their land. In return, he took steps to help preserve their language, as well as forge a government-protected reservation for them, as well as bring them a lot of different supplies and medicine over his time there. So this was, in my mind, a good exchange, as opposed to, you know, what I can imagine happens some of the sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about this book. It's really it really affected me in many ways. It's just so unbelievable sometimes. Like, even traumatized me during the when I was reading about that pregnant woman left alone and other things actually. So it made me question, human mind, like how does our mind work, and limits of my empathy. This was a very shocking thing for me because I thought I'm an empathic person, but like I was really questioning it during the reading. And the necessity of modern life, of course, like how much do we need? Like how much do we need to be detached from the nature? Like what is needed to be happy actually? And also, it makes you wonder about the type of the language that was used and like created in that environment, like how culture can create actually, like what we have is actually culture in as a whole, like language, traditions and type of life. And I love this carpe diem. I don't know if you know it, like living in the moment, and I think they're the exact definition of carpe diem. And this is why they're happy, probably because they think they don't need anything else, then they are superior to others and they don't accept anything. And then it's just like enjoying the life to the fullest is a great joy. Probably it's not a bad thing, and we don't have the right of questioning other people's lives, probably. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, yeah.